Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, where we discuss infamous cases of death and murder that have an element of food to them, and then we cook or sample the food from the case. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. When you think of exotic places that some people would like to visit, Macau is always at the top of that list. It is located on China's southern coast, just west of Hong Kong. Macau is sometimes called the Las Vegas of the East. It's a major resort city and a top destination for serious gamblers, with a gambling industry 7 times larger than that of Las Vegas. It is very densely populated and has a very unique skyline featuring several unusually designed skyscrapers. It's got beaches and resorts, and it's a very popular vacation destination. It's also got one of the most impressive bridges in the world, the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, which is a feat of engineering. The food has a lot of Portuguese influence because it was, for over 400 years, a colonial possession of Portugal. Shrimp, fish, noodles, rice, those are all staples, but so are pork buns. Pork buns are one of the most popular snacks in Macau, and there are a lot of restaurants to grab this popular food for a meal or a quick bite. I'm going to apologize in advance for my pronunciation of a lot of these Chinese words. I have no idea what I'm doing. In the mid-1980s, one of the restaurants serving up the very popular food of pork buns was called the Eight Immortals. The Eight Immortals was a Chinese restaurant in the port of Macau. This wasn't a fancy place. It was in what we would consider like a strip mall, run by a family. You know, those places you run in, you grab something that's really tasty, but it's quick, and then you're on your way. It was a modest little eatery owned and operated by Zheng Lin. Lin started out as a street stand operator, and his food was so popular that he was able to move to a brick and mortar location and open a restaurant. Financially, the restaurant was a success, but unfortunately, both Lin and his wife were very heavy gamblers. On August 4th, 1985, 9 members of the Zheng family were busy working inside the restaurant. It was closed for the evening, but the family was inside cleaning up and doing prep work for the following day. The Zheng family were known to associate with a man named Huang Ziheng. Huang had married a woman in Guangzhou, and her family did not approve of the marriage. So the couple fled Guangzhou and moved to Macau. Now, that wasn't the only reason Huang fled Guangzhou. He had actually killed a man in 1973 and hadn't been caught. He was very paranoid about getting caught and had even burned his fingerprints off to avoid being linked to this murder. When Huang and his wife got to Macau, he became very involved in gambling, and it was through his love of gambling that he met the Zheng family. Now, I am not familiar with the ins and outs of the local Macau gambling scene, but as I researched this, I learned that it's very common in that area for people to gamble kind of one-on-one with friends, with neighbors, and if you lose to your friends or neighbors, you are very much expected to pay that marker. During one evening of gambling in 1984, Huang and Zheng Lin became involved in a series of high-stakes bets against each other. When it was over, Huang won 180,000 pataka, which is $20,000 here in the U.S. So these were some major gambling stakes. They weren't playing for nickels here. 20 grand is a lot of money to lose to a friend. So now Zheng Lin and his wife owe Huang 20 grand. Well, the Zhengs didn't have 20 grand to pay Huang. They made a verbal agreement that the Zhengs would cede their restaurant's mortgage to Huang if they could not pay him back within a year. Huang agreed to this, and so did Lin. But even after many visits to the restaurant and reminders that the year was passing, the Zhengs never paid Huang the money they lost to him. Huang further claimed that he had continued to gamble with the Zhengs, and they had continued to lose to him. They actually owed him 600,000 pataka, which is around $75,000. 75 grand is a huge gambling debt for anyone. I don't know a lot of people that could just come up with $75,000 on top of all their other expenses, or even a payment that would suffice for that much money on top of monthly expenses. That's a lot of cash. So when Huang walked into the Eight Immortals restaurant on August 4th, 1985, he was not a welcome sight. The Zhengs knew why he was there, and they knew it wasn't good. Huang demanded that the Zhengs pay him 30,000 pataka, only a fraction of what they owed him, but the Zhengs said they couldn't even pay that. Huang then told Lin he was taking the restaurant as they had agreed a year earlier, and Lin refused to honor the agreement. Lin said he would not turn over the restaurant, and he refused to gather the documents Huang would need in order to prove ownership of the Eight Immortals. The argument grew more intense, and Huang picked up a beer bottle and broke it. He grabbed one of the Zheng's sons and held the broken beer bottle to his neck. While holding the son hostage, he demanded that the family members tie each other up. The family members obeyed and bound and gagged each other to save their son and brother from being killed with the broken beer bottle. As Huang decided what to do next, one of the Zheng's daughters broke free from her bindings and began to scream. She tried to run for help, but Huang grabbed her and repeatedly cut her neck with the jagged glass beer bottle. As she lay bleeding to death on the floor of her family's restaurant, Huang took the beer bottle and went, one by one, killing each and every family member that was in the restaurant. They remained bound and helpless as he either strangled or stabbed all 9 people to death. That is actually really tough to wrap your mind around. Laying there helpless, watching someone murder your family and knowing that you're next. That's actually, oh, wow. Huang then realized that one of the Zheng's daughters was missing. She had not been at the restaurant that night, but he knew where she was. So he went and found her and lured her back to the restaurant. Once he had her inside, he killed her as well. Huang then set about cleaning up the unthinkable mess he had made. Over the course of the next 8 hours, he dismembered the family's bodies. He wrapped the body parts up in black trash bags and then took them to bridges and threw them into the ocean or dumped them in nearby dumpsters. He then went back to the restaurant, cleaned it thoroughly, and opened the safe with the key he had taken from Zheng Lin's body. When he was finished, he locked the restaurant up and slept in the Lin's home not far from the business. That's terrible. Wipe out the whole family and then go spend the night in their house. The next morning, a delivery truck driver arrived to drop off supplies for the restaurant, and he saw a note on the door that said the restaurant would be closed for 3 days. He was confused about this because Lin had ordered a delivery, so he went to their home to find out what was going on. When he got there, it was not one of the Zheng family members that opened the door. It was Huang. And he told the delivery driver that the Zhengs had gone on vacation. About 4 days later, a swimmer was horrified to find 8 pieces of human limbs on a nearby beach. The police were called immediately, and they initially believed the body parts belonged to a group of illegal immigrants whose boat had capsized. They were apparently aware that there had been a boating accident, and a boat carrying a lot of people had capsized, so at first they thought, well, these are some of those victims. But as investigators examined the body parts, they could clearly see that they had been severed intentionally with a blade. Over the next week, more body parts began washing up on Macau beaches, and the press was covering the gruesome discoveries daily. After a couple of weeks, family members of the Zhengs who had reported them missing became more insistent. Something was wrong. Now, just days after the murders, Huang had actually reopened the Eight Immortals and was operating it himself. The police went to the restaurant and found Huang, who showed them he had the ownership documents for the restaurant. He had the key to the safe, and he had the keys to the doors, and he explained to them that the Zhengs had left him the restaurant and moved away. As time went by and the Zhengs could not be found, the police grew more suspicious of Huang, and they looked into his banking records. They found documents belonging to the Zhengs, including the children's school IDs that they would need to attend school anywhere, even if they had moved. As the police began to close in on Huang, he attempted to flee to mainland China, but he was caught and arrested in September of 1986. His arrest was a media sensation, and when people found out that he had been operating the restaurant after the murders, the urban legend of the Pork Bun Murders was born. The press began speculating that Huang had actually used parts of the Zheng family instead of pork in the pork buns he was selling. Books were written about it and movies were made. Movies were definitely made about this story, and I think it's safe to say they won't be winning any Oscars, but it was a real fascination with the people of China.
In a sleepy port town in Macau, on the southeast coast of China, the gentle townfolk are about to awake to an unimaginable horror. The local police are doing their best, but who could have ever guessed the delicious secret? Critically acclaimed, an instant cult classic. Written by and starring Danny Lee, star of John Woo's The Killer. And starring Hardboiled's Anthony Wong in the riveting performance that earned him the 1993 Hong Kong Film Award for Best Actor. Creepy. Demented. Darkly witty. Thrilling. And 100% fresh. Based, unfortunately, upon real events.
Huang was sent to prison, where he was attacked by a fellow inmate the day after his conviction. He was sent to the hospital to recover there, and he attempted to escape, but he was caught again. He was sent back to prison, where he eventually confessed to the murders of the Zheng family. After he died, his fingerprints that he attempted to burn off linked him to the 1973 murder committed in Guangzhou. The legend of the Eight Immortals, commonly known as the Pork Bun Murders, lives on. This very famous film is called The Untold Story, but in certain areas it's known as simply the Pork Bun Murder movie. The urban legend of the man who killed an entire family and used them as meat in sandwiches lives on, even though there is no proof that Huang used any human parts during the time he operated the restaurant. Now, as we always do on this playlist, we cook or sample the food that's involved with the story. I have never made pork buns. I have watched pork buns being made I don't know how many hundreds of times. I'm one of those people that's scrolling on TikTok at 3 a.m. watching people cook. But watching somebody do something and doing it yourself is very different. So I will be the first to admit these will probably not be the greatest pork buns in the world. Now, I do know how to cook some meat, so that part will be okay. But, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little nervous about the bun part. It's a really sad story, and people get after me on this channel all the time because I cook after talking about the sad story. But again, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm talking about the things that make us all the same. That's my thing. So stay with me right now because we are going to make pork buns, food from the Eight Immortals, as we go dining with death. Normally here I say, we are ready to cook, but am I today? I am stressed about this. Chinese bun making is an art form. I have never done this before, and I am about 50% expecting a complete disaster. But we're gonna be optimistic. The first thing we need to do is make the dough. I've got a half a cup of warm water here, and to that we're going to add 1 1/4 teaspoons of sugar and 3/4 of a teaspoon of dry yeast. You're gonna stir that really well until the yeast and the sugar are dissolved. Then you're gonna slowly add that to 2 cups, 2 tablespoons flour until it's well incorporated. If you need to add a little extra water, you can do that. You're looking for kind of a craggy dough that kind of barely holds together, looks a little bit like this. And then you're gonna knead that dough for 8 minutes. The video is very specific in saying it takes a long time to knead this dough to develop the proteins, and so get your workout in. Pinch that into a little ball, form it into a nice round shape, and then find yourself a warm place in the kitchen, put that in a bowl, cover it up. You can use a plate. I used a dish towel, and let that rest for about 90 minutes. Okay, while our dough is rising, we're going to prepare the filling. I've got about a pound of pork shoulder here that I have pulled off of the bone, and we're gonna mince that up really fine. I watched so many videos in preparation for this, you guys, and they all had a different take on this, so I am fully aware that this is not how everyone makes their pork buns. There were so many varieties and so many different kinds, I can't even begin to tell you, but I will say there were a few things that all of the videos had in common, and one of those was that you mince your own pork. Do not buy ground pork from the store. The video that I ended up getting the most information from, that I felt was the most informative and the easiest to follow step by step, comes from the YouTube channel Chinese Cooking Demystified. So I'm giving them all the credit. Oh, maybe that's a bad thing. If this doesn't go well, forget what I just said. But if it goes well, but really their video was so informative and so detailed. It had very specific instructions laid out very, very clearly. So I want to thank them for this. And I will actually link the video in the description of my video so you can check it out if you want. The video said to mince for at least 5 minutes. So you're looking for a really finely minced kind of paste. Okay, I've got that pork all minced up and tenderized. I've been working on it for 5 minutes. I've broken a sweat. We're gonna set it in a bowl. We are going to season the minced pork with a 1/4 teaspoon salt and a 1/4 teaspoon sugar, a 1/2 teaspoon of cornstarch and 1/8 teaspoon of white pepper, a 1/2 tablespoon of soy sauce, and a 1/2 teaspoon of Shaoxing wine. I'm gonna mix that just like I would mix meatloaf with my hands. I'm gonna set that aside. We are now going to make a spiced water to mix in with the minced pork. So I've got a 1/4 cup of very hot water here that has just been boiled. To that, I'm gonna add 2 star anise, a teaspoon of fennel seeds and a teaspoon of Szechuan peppercorn, 3 1-inch pieces off of a leek, and about 1 inch of ginger. That already smells so good. The recipe also called for 1/2 of a black cardamom pod, but good luck finding that in my town. I couldn't. You're basically making a little spiced tea. I love this. I think it's genius. You're gonna set that aside for 30 minutes to steep and cool. Our little spice tea, our spice water, has been steeping and has cooled. It's been 30 minutes, so we're gonna strain it. Discard the solids and keep the water. That smells so good. Mostly star anise, but definitely the leek as well. Okay, 1 tablespoon at a time. We are going to begin adding this water to the pork while stirring constantly in one direction for at least 5 minutes. We are lengthening the strands of protein in the pork by stirring it and seasoning it in this manner. It's ingenious. Okay, 1 tablespoon. 2 tablespoons. You can see that the texture is starting to change. And this is the last tablespoon. Okay, it has been 5 minutes of stirring, and the meat is now kind of a paste. It looks very, very soft. Let's set that aside. Our dough has risen and doubled in size. It's been about 1.5 hours. We're gonna punch that down and knead it. First, we need to flour our work surface. And we're gonna flour the top of the dough a little bit. Okay, let's roll this out. Okay, we've got a rectangle, and we're gonna roll it up like you would do if you were making cinnamon rolls. I am not a baker. I bake occasionally, but baking and cooking are two very different things. We're going to divide this roll into 8 equal parts. So down the center first, half each side. And half again. Now we're going to take each one of these sections, we're going to roll it into a ball, press it flat, and fold the corners in to the center to form a little ball. Pinch it, give it a twist, and shape your little dough ball. We've got our 8 little dough balls formed, and now comes the part I've been stressing over for a couple of weeks. Let's re-flour our board. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this could be a disaster. I almost forgot, the meat mixture gets a teaspoon of sesame oil when you're done mixing it, so I'm gonna add that now. Okay, here goes, Santa Maria. Okay, we're gonna flatten the little dough ball into a flat square. You take your rolling pin and you roll in to the edge, and then when you roll back out, you press down very, very hard. You're flattening and thinning the edges of the outside of the dough circle, leaving the center a little thicker than the edges. So here goes. That is not a perfect circle, but the edges are definitely thinner than the center, which I think is the most important thing. We are now going to take a 1/4 cup of the filling and place it in the middle. I'm so scared right now. Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how many times I've watched this being done and I'm terrified. Okay, you hold your thumb in place and you use your index finger. This is so much harder than it looks. You use your index finger to bring the dough to your thumb, this way. You rotate, grab the dough this way. It's already crooked. Turn, grab the dough. You guys, this is so much harder than it looks. Okay, I think my dough might be too much over the top of my filling, and you're supposed to stuff the filling down with your fingers as you go. You twist. I can't. My apologies to the Chinese culture. Everyone who has ever made a pork bun. It's okay, Mommy still loves you, even though you're ugly. We're just gonna pinch that on up there and I'm so sorry. I am so sorry if I've offended anyone. We're gonna keep going. Bamboo steamer. You take a square of parchment paper, lay it down on the inside, put your little baby on the little square of parchment paper. It's all right, little buddy. We'll get through this together. Let's try this again. Oh my gosh, that's so much harder than it looks, and they don't look good. I know they don't. Come on, little baby. 2 down, 6 to go. I will see you tomorrow. Well, that went about as I expected it to go, although I will say I enjoyed it. There was something very meditative about making those little pleats. They don't look good, they're not done right, but they're done and we're gonna taste them. So the next step, you need a wok with a few inches of water in the bottom. You're going to place your bamboo steamer full of the buns down in the wok, cover it, and bring the water in the wok to 100 degrees. And then you're going to let the bamboo steamer sit over the warm water for 30 minutes so the buns proof and rise again. After 30 minutes at 100 degrees, I had a hard time keeping my heat that low. You are going to turn the heat up to medium-high and bring the water to a boil. Once the water starts boiling and you see steam rising from the basket, set your timer for 15 minutes and let the buns steam for 15 minutes. Our buns... I can't keep a straight face. I knew this was going to be a disaster, but I didn't think it was going to be this bad. I tried, and I learned something today, but you didn't. Maybe you learned never try to make these. I will say the dough is really nice and soft. It tastes like a roll, like a Sunday dinner roll. The pork is really nicely seasoned. I was surprised this recipe didn't have any garlic in it. I think this might be the only Asian recipe that I've ever made that doesn't have a little bit of garlic in it, but you learn something new every day. The dough's very tender and it's very fluffy and soft. The meat is very juicy and it's really well seasoned, really nicely balanced. It's not overpowering with salt or anise flavor. It's really quite nice. Well, my friends, you win some and you lose some, and today was an L for me. I did enjoy trying this and I will try it again. It was actually pretty fun to make these. There is something in Macau called a Macau pork bun that is a Portuguese roll, buttered and grilled with a pork chop in between the buns. But as I looked at the movie poster, it was these type of buns that were in the movie poster and were in all of the literature, the books and everything that were written about this case. So I decided to make these because I felt like that's probably the kind of food that was served at the Eight Immortals. I definitely have a lot to learn about Chinese cooking, especially Chinese bun making. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death for this epic disaster. I sure hope you're well. Like the video if you liked it and subscribe to the channel if you would like to support me. It really does help me a lot. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.